Thank you, madam, for tracing the spiritual ethos and cultural vibrancy of Kanwadiya tradition with such clarity. We now move into the heart of Indian devotional philosophy, the world of Bhakti, its origins, its evolution, and its synthesis across countries. Our honored scholar for this session is Shri G.N. Devy, Professor of Eminence and Director of the School of Civilization, Somaya Vidya Vihar University, Mumbai. A thinker, writer, and cultural visionary whose voice has shaped contemporary discourse. Sir, we invite you to lead us into the profound journey of Bhakti, its genesis and synthesis. I request our director, Shri H.N. Suresh sir, to come on dais and felicitate our esteemed guest. Thank you, sir. I invite Shri Prakash Kamath on the dais to introduce our esteemed guest.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all. It's my privilege to introduce Professor Ganesh Narayan Devy, one of India's most respected academics, public intellectuals, and cultural visionaries. Professor Devy has devoted his life to literature, linguistics, and the preservation of India's extraordinary cultural diversity. He is the founder of the Bhasha Research and Publication Center in Baroda and the Adivasi Academy in Tejgarh, institutions that have become pioneering platforms for conserving indigenous languages, tribal knowledge, and oral traditions. Professor Devy's academic journey began at Shivaji University, where he earned his BA, MA, and PhD in English literature, followed by advanced study at Leeds University in the United Kingdom. His teaching career has spanned Maharaja Sayajirao University in Baroda, the Dhirubhai Ambani Institute in Gandhinagar, and visiting professorships at leading institutions across India. Today, he serves as Professor of Eminence and Director of the School of Civilization at Somaya Vidya Vihar University in Mumbai. He has been a builder of movements, founding the Denotified and Nomadic Tribes Rights Action Group, the People's Linguistic Survey of India, and Dakshinayana, a collective of writers for freedom of expression. His work has given voice to communities long marginalized and ensured their languages and traditions are preserved for future generations. Professor Devy's contributions have been recognized with some of the highest honors. He was awarded the Padma Shri in 2014, the UNESCO Lingua Pax Award in 2011, and the Sahitya Academy Award for his landmark book After Amnesia. He has also received the Prince Claus Award from the Netherlands and numerous Lifetime Achievement Awards from across India. His scholarship has been enriched by prestigious fellowships, including Fulbright at Yale and the Jawaharlal Nehru Fellowship, leading to influential works such as number 1 in Another Tongue, number 2 of Many Heroes, and number 3 Countering Violence. What makes Professor Devy truly remarkable is the way he bridges scholarships with activism. He has shown us that knowledge is not confined to books. It can transform societies, empower communities, and preserve the soul of a nation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor G.N. Devy, a scholar of distinction, a custodian of India's cultural heritage, and a voice of conscience in our times. I now request Professor G.N. Devy to present his paper. Thank you so much.
Prakash ji, all eminent persons from the Bharati Vidyapit, Bangalore, Vidya Bhavan, Bangalore. Ladies and gentlemen, you had a tremendous feast of knowledge and culture over the last 11 days. Today is the 12th day. And I would like to publicly put on record my personal gratitude for organizing something of this scope, this scale. Let me state the reasons for that. This extensive articulation of dignity and love during the second millennium in India, stretching all the way from Kerala to Assam, from Orissa to Rajasthan, is known among literary scholars by the term Bakthi, as a Bakthi period. These 1,000 years cultural history of India has received a raw deal, both at the hands of the British scholars and at the hands of Indian scholars as well. My reasons are for thanking you. First, when European countries started colonizing other continents, Europe had just about gone through a great turmoil, philosophical, political, cultural, and social. To sum up that turmoil, I can use the phrase the conflict between the Catholics and the Protestants. The Catholic view of the world was based on the idea that this world has its own logic and grammar. It has its own self-governance. It has its wisdom, and they called it the natural law. The Protestants, who had rebelled against the Catholic Church, brought forward the view that humans are important, and justice and dignity and equality are very important. Now, that was a long debate, fought over 2 centuries, but by the time the Portuguese, the French, and the British started, and even Germans and the Dutch started venturing out to colonize other continents, they thought that what they were missing, that is the spiritual core of being, what they were missing in Europe, possibly can be attributed to other societies. And right, left, center, they started describing the indigenous people in the Americas and Australia, New Zealand, in Africa, and Indians here in South Asia as hugely spiritual communities. That is, they were trying to locate elsewhere what they had missed. And there is a lot of historical research material available on this particular interpretation. So it is not something that I have made up. European scholars and travelers started describing India as a place suffused with spirituality. And in the course of our getting colonized, we too imbibe that view, while the reality surrounding us during the 17th century and the 18th century did not exactly would not have allowed us to describe ourselves as hugely spiritual. But that image, excessively spiritual, if Europe was materialistic, then if the West was materialistic, the East was spiritual, including Japan, which cannot boast of a long spiritual tradition as such. And China, of course, China, Japan, India. I think if we had looked at the medieval times more closely ourselves, we could have corrected this particular view. But this particular view that I mentioned resulted in Indians believing that their very remote ancient past was only spiritual, that there was no cruelty, that there was no inequality, that there was no exploitation. And that's a slightly unrealistic attitude of looking at the past. We mythologize our past, and we took our myths as if they were history. And even now, even very high officers and high scholars, they talk of myths as if they're part of our history. Now, this particular focus on bhakti can introduce some sense of balance in the view about the past. And that's why I want to congratulate you and thank you. Secondly, historians themselves, Indian historians, have accepted an intellectual habit, intellectual fashion of proposing history exactly in terms of history as it was proposed for England. That is, England had an ancient history, medieval history, and modern history. And that England had proposed for itself in terms of the linguistic shifts in England, because they could not have understood English language of Beowulf, is 10th century or 8th century English epic. They could not have understood language spoken before Spencer and Shakespeare, medieval English. They understood only modern English. So the history also became a threefold history: ancient, medieval, modern. Now, for a place like South Asia, India, the past has been far, far too long. And probably we should have proposed an eightfold or tenfold or fivefold history. But we accepted this ancient, medieval, and modern. And having accepted that view of history, we also accepted a statement by Sir William Jones made in 1787, when Jones discovered that there were lots of similarities between Latin and Greek, Persian and Sanskrit, Iranian, ancient Iranian, Persian and Sanskrit. He said he would like to go back and explore all the similarities to show how the Indo-European languages form one single family. And in that lecture, a very short lecture, he said in so many words, that my job, I mean, William Jones said, James said, my job is to go from the 11th century AD backwards as far as possible. But he left out the period after the 11th century as a blank, while Iranian, that is Persian, Sanskrit, and its daughters, Indo-Aryan languages, had continued. Having left that particular period blank, the British discourse immediately took advantage and started saying that India was hugely civilized at one time. But then came the Muslims, completely, complete falsification of our history. And then there was nothing but collapse, nothing but ruination, nothing but tragedy. We imbibe that view of history as well. The entire Bhakti period counters that view. And that's why I want to thank you for thinking of Bhakti as an expression of civilizational contemplation and social reformation. So that's my second reason for thanking you. There have been very few occasions in India when discussion of various states and 1,000 years history has been undertaken from a positive angle during the last 60 or 70 years. So this is a unique event that you organize. My third reason is, after William Jones and the emergence of Sanskrit as some kind of miracle of the ancient times, even while there were studies of Dravidian languages by Kettle in Dharwad or by Ellis, somehow the Dravidian language family came to be seen as slightly less dignified, less respectable than Indo-Aryan in the minds of the people. When one talks of civilization and culture of India, one does not first speak of Dravidian civilization and then Indo-Aryan. While the fact of history is, and genetics has shown us, that humans, Homo sapiens, have been dwelling in southern part of South Asia at least for the last 65,000 years. If you want to see the last piece of research on that, please read Tony Joseph. Tony Joseph is not a European man, he is from Kerala. Otherwise somebody might say, oh, these Western scholars, they are evil-minded. Tony Joseph's early Indians. And all the genetic research shows that out of Africa people landed in India after their first migration, first in South India. So really, when we talk of Indian civilization, we should be beginning with Dravidic rather than Indo-Aryan. And that is not done. But when we speak of Bakthi, we are required to begin with Tamil Nadu. And I feel happy that at least some justice is being done to that fact, which is a historically and scientifically established fact. For giving that opportunity, I want to thank you. Finally, we all know that India has received two very deep wounds. The soul of India has received two very deep wounds, which are not as yet healed. And I hope a day comes when that will happen. One, of course, I mentioned colonialism, and that has interfered seriously with our ways of knowing ourselves. But the other wound is far more serious, and that is, in this subcontinent, a social structure evolved where humans were treated even worse than animals. And women were treated as if they were cows or buffaloes. Manusmriti, for instance, mentions that all the cows belonging to the entire earth belong to a Brahmin. Complete, unrestricted, unchallengeable right. My job here is not to criticize Manusmriti. My job is to remind myself that the Bakthi period was the period when Indian thinkers, poets, saints raised a voice against the Varna system. Varna was a dehumanizing system. I hang my head down in shame when I think of Varna system, where there is a pack of human beings and some are born as superior and others are born as inferior. That's absolute nonsense. It goes against any idea of minimum humanity. When we speak of Bhakti period, we speak of the reclamation of dignity by potters, by cobblers, by weavers, people of all kinds. And I think I want to thank you for giving that opportunity for so many speakers. When you ask them to perform Meera or Kabir or Tukaram here. When lectures were delivered on the Lingayat, Basveshwar and Akkama Devi, and the Alvars, and of course Shankar Dev, and Krishna Chaitanya, and Surdas, and Tyagaraj, Narsi Mehta. I think This was a unique celebration of the dignity of humans as humans. So, for so many reasons, I want to thank you. If in India we conceptualize our past, particularly our modern history, if we conceptualize it as beginning with the Bakthi period, we might be able to understand our modern times far, far better. Rather than imagining our modern times as if, miraculously coming to us with the arrival of the Portuguese or the British. Because these modern times are marked by claim of humans as everybody deserving of dignity. And Bhakti period made that claim in a big way. There were certain methods that the Bhakti poets followed in making that claim. And the first method was to disown a language of inheritance. That is, in other words, they disowned Sanskrit as language of culture and inheritance. Please think of this. In Europe, Latin declined and French, Spanish, Portuguese, other languages emerged. With political changes taking place, and particularly decline of the Roman Empire, the later day Roman Empire. In India, Sanskrit perhaps would have continued even beyond the 9th century as a living language, as a vibrant language. It did not, and other languages came up, because there appears to be a strong attitude towards that language taking shape during the 9th and the 10th century. Please allow me to give a brief overview of what the Sanskrit language has been. There are many misconceptions about it. There is a huge amount of scholarly literature, and where Madam is the director now, chairperson, Bhandarkar Institute has a vast library on the past of the Sanskrit language. And many other Indological institutions have that. Humans have spoken languages for the last 70,000 years. Because language made humans, distinct from other animals. This claim is not a mythological claim. It is based on scientific works. Homo sapiens developed language as a weapon, weaponized language, and made their movement possible. They had arrived in India and gone through these cycles of first being hunter-gatherers. I'm talking of humans and not of gods and things like that. Humans like you and me. They have gone through a cycle of first being hunter-gatherers, then being pastoral nomads, and all these things are related to food supply, food shortage, and so on. But I won't elaborate on this. Why hunters become gatherers and why they become pastoralists and then nomads and then pastoralists and start cultivating animals and then agrarians. And they had established anthropologically small groups of people spread over India having hundreds of languages. Please remember, if you look at the words related to agriculture, agriculture implements, and methods of agriculture in any part of India, you do not find in those, for those things, words coming from either Sanskrit or from Persian or from English. These languages predate English, Persian, and Sanskrit. Sanskrit, which is a branch of a larger language family called the Indo-European language family, had started developing in the Eurasian steppes, and a branch went to Europe, another branch went to West Asia, became Iranian, and a branch came to us. A small thread of that also went to China and came to be known as Tocharian, but it died around 1000 AD, at around 1000 AD, 1000 years before our time. When Sanskrit arrived here, India had agrarians and pastoral nomads had been migrating. I mean, in Maharashtra, this Wari, which is now seen as a Vaishnava festival, actually the pastoral nomads, based on the cycle of monsoon, had been making trips between the coastal area and the interior of Maharashtra for the millennia soon after Holocene. Holocene is about 12,000 years before our time. So soon after that, the nomads have been wandering over this land. The arrival of Sanskrit around 1400 before Christ, about 500 years after Harappa and Mohenjo-daro and the Indus civilization had declined, first created literature of nomads, which was the Rig Veda, and fantastic literature, extremely well organized, with more than 10,000 mantras, about more than 1,000 mandalas, 10 books, and with absolutely mind-boggling mnemonics. That is, if one wanted to remember, it was possible to remember all that. And that was remembered. It was oral traditions continued. Around the 7th century before Christ, when the Rig Veda by then is around 7 centuries old, and 7 centuries is a long time, very long period, which had come down in the form of oral recitation, memorization, and re-rendition, was sought to be kind of brought into an order. So we have on one side Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, but on the other side there is Yaska, who wanted to systematize the Rig Veda. One of the greatest scholars of our times, India, modern times, who had a very deep intuitive access to Rig Veda, was Shri Aurobindo. I hope you'll agree with me. He's written a book of essays on the secret of the Veda. And in that he has a very strange kind of sentence which made me think a lot. He says, oral tradition preserves by obscuring. That is, oral tradition does not keep everything exactly as it is. In the case of Rig Veda, that did not happen. The original pronunciation, the words, the sandhis were handed down ditto because of the metrical machinery of the Vedas, which allowed that kind of memorization without the slightest flaw. Aurobindo's argument is that while people could recite the Vedas, they did not actually understand what they meant. The symbolic meaning was lost. Etymological meaning remained. And Yaska gave in Nigantu, that is what Yaska gave. Aurobindo says that the symbolic meaning was lost. And thereafter, this is Aurobindo's view, not my view. Aurobindo says thereafter, people started wondering at the Rig Veda as if it contains magic. Please, read Aurobindo's essays on the Vedas. If you like to dismiss those, dismiss, you're free. I'm only reproducing what he said. The number of people who spoke Sanskrit was extremely limited. There is a good study of Indian populations in the past by a man called Dyson, Again, this evil, don't say evil Western man. Science has some merit. And the people who spoke Sanskrit, obviously they did not speak Dravidian, Proto-Dravidian, they did not speak the Proto-Assamese and so on. They did not speak the languages of the nomadic communities, the nomads. Limited space, limited group, limited number. Despite a limited number, the esteem of the language was so high that with the help of that esteem, by putting in more and more layers of magical, identity in the Veda, this particular class, I do not like to call it Brahminical class because there may be misunderstanding that I am talking about a caste, which I am not doing. But I will say the Vedic class actually managed to create a hierarchy of castes which had come into existence because of the agrarian past, pre-Vedic, pre-Harappan past that India had. And so the Varna system was imposed on people. Those who could recite were at the top. Those who gave security to these people, protected them, became the next Varna. Those who were in the supply line became the next Varna, and others who were not related at all became the Shudras, less than human. This imposition of Varna continued in our society despite opposition, and we heard this morning from, and why that opposition comes in the 6th century before Christ is from Gautam Buddha. The timing is very important. Despite that opposition, the Varna system continued. And because of the unusual esteem that Sanskrit had acquired, it spread. Hegemony does not require massive force from the government to, like the British rule was in India, but we did not have crores of British coming to India. The maximum number of English people in India at any given time in their rule was 1,42,000. But certain ideas, they came here saying that, okay, you were civilized in the past, but you now decline. We'll bring civilization back to you. Civilizing India is our mission. And we accepted that. Hegemony is accepted by consent of the people who readily get enslaved to an idea. Varna was an enslavement for Indian society. And it dehumanized a large number of Indians. Because obviously the Vedic class, the Brahmin class, it's not a caste, Brahmin caste that I'm speaking, please don't misunderstand. I have no love or hate for any particular caste, please. The number was small, the largest number was of the people who got dehumanized, who got oppressed. And it is during the Bakthi period that a challenge arose to that kind of oppression. In order to pose that challenge, while these poets knew Sanskrit, they declined to use Sanskrit. I'll give you examples. Hemachandracharya was mentioned this morning in the first lecture when we heard about Jainism. He was in Gujarat. Hemachandracharya wrote in the 11th century a dictionary, Desi Namamala. While he knew Sanskrit, he chose to write in Prakrit, early form of Gujarati. Or closer home for me, I come from Maharashtra. There was a man called Jnaneshwar, or Jnaneshwar. He rendered the Gita into Marathi. Now, for rendering the Gita into Marathi, he had to know the Gita in Sanskrit. We do not say that he did not know Sanskrit, that he knew only Marathi. He could have become a Sanskrit Pandit as well. He was Brahmin, though outcast. I mean, his own people had thrown him out of the caste because his father, who had taken sannyas, had remarried, it seems. He chose to write in Marathi, and he celebrates his Marathi. He calls it Marathi is another city, another society, another realm where people can live, and he's after writing the entire Gita, all of you probably have read the Gita, and in the last three adhyayas of Gita is all about having a life after death, which is which is taking you higher, about moksha. Jnaneshwar doesn't ask for moksha. He says in Marathi, Duritanse timira jao. Let all the oppressed ones find some sunlight. Those homes which have never seen sunlight, let sunlight enter those homes. So somebody who knows Sanskrit but does not want to repeat the Varna system, and he had suffered himself because of that. Because of Brahminism, he had suffered. So he challenges that. And so does Eknath, who was mentioned in the covered by Madam. Eknath says if Sanskrit was produced by Deva, it was called Deva Bhasha. Was Marathi created by thieves? Sanskrit देवानी बनवली तर मराठी चोरांनी बनवली काय? Eknath was a Brahmin and he had access to Sanskrit. He did not write in Sanskrit. Can go on giving these examples. But let me turn to Karnataka. It is 11th century where a new spiritual impulse emerges, an extraordinarily unparalleled impulse. And I call it the beginning of modernism in India. And that comes from Basavanna. And Basavanna is saying, I don't recognize caste, I don't recognize Varna, and I don't recognize gender distinction. Women, men of all castes can come here. And he created a people's parliament. Did he not have access to just 2 centuries before him what Adi Shankara had created? Obviously he had, because Basavanna himself belonged to an upper caste and had all the wherewithals to study what Adi Shankara would have said. In state after state after state, this happened. In Assam, Shankar Dev, I mentioned that. But in Rajasthan, a Sufi poet brought that. Now, there are 4, you will say, if this was, Bhakti was a rebellion against Sanskrit and the Sanskrit idea of spirituality, not the Upanishads, but the Vedas, then why did they choose the gods like, the godheads like Krishna and Rama and Shiva? And of course, there is another branch which comes up particularly in the medieval times, and that is Nath, the Machindranath and his disciple, Gorakhnath. Gorakhnath, there are 2 Gorakhnaths like Manu. One is mythical Gorakhnath, whose history is traced back by his bhaktas all the way to Shiva and so on. There is another that is historical Gorakhnath, who seems to have dwelt in this part of the world sometime around the 10th or 11th century. So the Nath Pantha, the Tantra, the Shaiva and Vaishnava. Why did the Bhakti poets not give up on this? My answer to that is that they did not have any quarrel with literature of the past. They had quarrel with the social order of the past. They accepted Sufism with as much love as they accepted Tantrism. They did not want to be ruled by gods. They wanted to create a human society which is equal. They did not succeed fully, but they did prepare us for facing the colonial rule. I say this, perhaps this may not be easily accepted, but let me add quickly that I don't think of Tyagaraja in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh as the last of the Bhakti poets, or Ramdas and Tukaram as the last of the Bhakti poets in Maharashtra. I think of Tagore Gandhi and Aurobindo as the last of the Bhakti poets. They qualify in every respect what to be called Bhakti poets. They were doing precisely what the medieval poets were doing. And therefore, uh, I want to say that all of these, while knowing English in modern times, or Persian in medieval times, or Sanskrit in ancient times, or Sanskrit ancient, they chose to write in their own languages, except Aurobindo, who wrote in English, because his parents had sent him off to Cambridge at the age of 5. I mean, Manchester, London, and Cambridge. The rise of the Indian languages, modern Indian languages. Kannada has an older history. I know it's a classical language, recognized classical language, but its literary history, Nrupatunga, that's about 1,000 years. Marathi has also a literary history, as language history, almost 1800 years or even older, but its history as literature history and literary language history is 1,000 years. Around the time Indians decided to set Sanskrit aside and start speaking in Indian languages, the growth of Indian languages begins. The entire Bhakti writing is in Indian languages, with one exception, and that is a Sanskrit poet who was employed in Shah Jahan's court, wrote poems in Sanskrit in praise of the Sultan, Jagannath Pandit, Pandit Jagannath. When Asaf Khan died, he wrote a poem called Asaf Vilas. But out of sense of embarrassment for just writing in Sanskrit, he also added some other languages in between, just as Kalidas used to add other languages in his Sanskrit place. The rise of modern Indian languages at the beginning of the second millennium is also the time when the modern thinking of, when I say modern, I don't mean equal to the West, or please set aside those ideas, by which I mean the importance of rationality over importance of myths. Increase rationality as against myths only. It is. I will stop. Do you want me to stop now?
Yeah, continue. 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. So, the rise of Indian languages and the rise and the entire Bhakti period are synonymous. Tukaram made Marathi what Marathi is, and so did Kabir and Meera. They did to Hindustani or Hindi literature, and in every state that happens. Or what Kannada is made by the poets of the Lingayat sect, whether it's Shishunal Sharif or Akkama Devi or Vachana literature or whatever. It's the same with Tamil poets, Alvars. I will make my last point. I think as a human being that every civilization should have great spiritual depth. And I'm very proud of the spiritual traditions of India. But I tend to think that the spiritual traditions must be also humanistic traditions. And therefore, I like to go back to Buddhist tradition, which was discussed here. Buddha was opposed during the heydays of Sanskrit, but Buddhism survived in India at least till the 9th century. After the 9th century, the Buddhist sanghas had come into severe disconnect with the people, and therefore Buddhism declined. Bhakti replaced Buddhism in India. Please think of this. Bhakti replaced Buddhism in India. And it is it is the human dignity and equality of people that Bhakti promoted. A spirituality of higher kind than spirituality which believes in discrimination or promotes discrimination unwittingly though. Spirituality which allows, nurtures equality and dignity is a greater spirituality in my opinion. I may be wrong, but that's my opinion. Aurobindo, Tagore and Gandhi were in my opinion the last Bhakts or Bhakt poet. One whose life is almost synonymous with Vaishnav Jana to tene kahiye or Ishwar Allah tere naam. Another, a translated Kabir, and Aurobindo translated Shaivite poets of Bengal and Orissa, and also some Hindi belt poets into English. All three had spoken before we became independent about the idea of nation. Tagore had promoted an international cultural exchange and Vishwa Bharati. Aurobindo said that a governance like the United Nations with very small local governments, and Gandhi was of course against the idea of this kind of massive nation being imposed on single Rashtra. Bhakti for 1,000 years has taught India, whether you like it or not, you might disagree with me, but this is a historical fact. Bhakti taught India for 1,000 years the importance of diversity and dignity and equality. And I want to congratulate you for bringing to Bangalore and through the online connectivity to the rest of the country a great opportunity to rethink as to who we are in India and what kind of spirituality defines our nation. I think in celebrating Bhakti, you have opened up a debate which I hope will be taken forward by people in this country who have sympathy for all classes, the downtrodden. The insights of Aurobindo, Gandhi and Tagore got aggregated in our constitution. Ambedkar, directly linked with Buddha in that tradition, said for us that we are all equals and we are all free. We have freedom and equality in this country. The constitution, in my opinion, is the greatest Bhakti poem that India ever produced. Thank you very much.